Hi, in this video I will show you how to map your information assets and map which of these assets you need to be aware of when it comes to NIS2. Afterwards, I will show just briefly how to make a NIS2 risk assessment of these particular assets. You start navigating to the asset in your menu, where you will get a list of the already mapped assets within your environment. You can always create a new asset by selecting Create Asset, and you can add one of our standard assets to the platform. Let's say I add Azure and say Load. Maybe I host some data or use Azure for an application where I need to be NIS2 compliant. And in this particular scenario, I want to add some extra information to Azure. So I can navigate to the right side of the asset and say Edit, and this will initiate the flow where I can add information to an asset. I will not go through every single input in this flow, but just show some examples. So it's possible to mark what is the storage type in this particular application or system. I can select a type. I can select which type of data do I handle in the platform, what is the network, and so on. It's of course also possible to add a supplier. In this particular example, Microsoft has already been added as a supplier because we use the template for Azure. Here you can also register multiple suppliers by adding a supplier down here. Here you can select a new supplier if that's relevant. And you can also add subcontractors to the Microsoft. So you can make a list of subcontractors here by selecting a subcontractor. You can select if the supplier is a data processor or not. This is more relevant if you use the platform for data protection, but it's recommended to mark if the supplier is a data processor or not. At this step, asset information, we have one very important input, which is this system operation critical? Because if I say yes to this is now a system I have mapped is need to be NIS2 compliant. So you can have a list of a lot of assets, but it's only the ones that you mark as critical that will be used in your NIS2 compliance work. So be aware of that input. Another interesting part is to map assets together. So maybe your Azure installation will talk together with other assets in your portfolio. Here it's possible to add another asset that is already mapped in your asset overview. And if so, now we will have a link between these two. So I said that link build and Azure now have a connection. This means if I navigate to link build here, I will be able to see that there is a connection to Azure as well. And this is what I want to focus on in terms of the mapping. Now the next step will be that you have your assets in your list here, but of course the risk assessments of these assets are interesting. I have the cross up here in terms of a compliance area and that I want to make risk assessments on an asset level. There is another introduction video to the more general parts of how the risk assessment module works. So if you haven't seen that yet, I would recommend to see that before heading into your risk assessments. But just to show an example on how we define which assets needs to be assessed within NIS2, I can set up a risk template for my NIS2 relevant assets. I will select one or more risk scenarios that I want to include in my risk assessments. And when I navigate back to the risk module, I will now see Azure in the list of assets that needs to be risk assessed, but I will also see link build because I made a connection between these two assets. So right now I need to make a risk assessment of these two assets, but I don't need to make it for the other assets in my overview because I haven't marked those as critical. Making the risk assessment works like mentioned before, like other risk assessments in the platform. So you will give it a score for a consequence and you will give it a score for a probability. You will write why have you selected this particular score, and when you are done with that, the risk scenarios will get a risk, which will mean that the asset itself will also get a risk. And in this example, I have a high risk, which means that I need to find or make a plan to mitigate this particular risk.